Over this past weekend, I looked into the Shanna Whitton case out of Clearwater, Kansas. Yesterday alone, I spent 4 hours researching this case because it keeps coming across my FYP. People keep sharing it with me because Shanna Whitton named her oldest daughter, well, her only daughter that I know of, Gypsy Rose. And yes, Shanna's daughter, who passed away not even 2 years ago, was legally named Gypsy Rose. But as you can see on her obituary, she went by Jojo, baby Jojo, Jolene Naomi Whitton. People are continuously comparing the Shanna Whitton case to the DeeDee Blanchard case, which is insanity because DeeDee was the victim in her case. She was the one that was unalived in her bed while she slept at the hands of her own daughter. Not only that, she never abused Gypsy. Gypsy got better, not worse. And she absolutely didn't have anything to do with unaliving any children, which is what Shanna is being accused of, her own children. And the reason people are making the connection between the two cases is because the media put out that this is possibly a case of Munchausen by proxy or medical child abuse. On April 13th, 2026, Sedgwick County District Attorney charged Shanna with first-degree felony murder in the death of her 15-month-old son, Matthew. She was also charged with abuse of a child, 1 count of aggravated child endangerment, and 1 count of aggravated arson. Now, before I can go into what happened to baby Matthew, we need to go back and talk about what happened to her older daughter. Gypsy Rose Whitton Marley was eating from a bowl of grapes on July 22nd, 2024, and choked when Shanna was in the bathroom, okay? EMS that was dispatched removed the grape, actually removed it from her airway, according to the autopsy. Shanna's story is when she came back from the restroom, little Gypsy Rose, or little Jojo, we're going to call her, was unconscious and unresponsive. The little girl was then transported to the hospital where she later passed away. Autopsy noted a review of records that showed multiple 911 calls prior to the passing of Jojo. Both children have a number of prior incidents where 911 was being called, and sometimes they were even being hospitalized due to their conditions. So August 11th, 2022, Gypsy Rose was admitted to the hospital for a clavicle fracture after a fall off the couch at 8 weeks old. We made it to almost 2 years later, and Gypsy Rose was admitted to the hospital with an episode of cyanosis, unintentional asphyxia, after sleeping with a blanket over her face and possibly a plastic bag over or near her face. It's my understanding when EMS arrived, there was a plastic bag laying next to the little girl. Only 3 days later, little Jojo choked on a grape and lost her life. Like, this is devastating. Not 1 child, but 2. An autopsy was done on little Jojo, and the doctor who performed it determined died as a result of choking, and manner of death is accidental. But they have now reopened the investigation into the choking incidents with little Jojo. A little more than a year later, Matthew has now died from choking on what the mother described to be a meatball. And then they didn't pull anything out of Matthew's airway. They also did an interview with a neighbor.
He just was kind of monotone. You would ask her a question and she would kind of just talk real slow. But after he passed, she was bouncing around out there in the field walking to the store when she was supposed to be walking on a walker. But she was out in the field bouncing around. And she was laughing and talking to him, and I had never heard her laugh before. And this was after Matthew passed. They took him out on the gurney, and he never came back home. First, she told people it was a meatball from SpaghettiOs with the sauce, and then she said it was the SpaghettiOs with the sausage in it.
What I immediately heard there is that Shanna is supposed to be using some sort of walker. So it's possible that she too is over exaggerating some sort of symptoms to get attention from medical conditions, allegedly, in my opinion. Now, there was a fire that broke out recently, and this is what the neighbor had to say about that.
Everybody's outside, and she was just quietly standing there while I was asking everybody what happened. And then she said, his nursery caught on fire.
Yes, a mysterious fire broke out in Matthew's bedroom, but there was things that happened before that. So September 13th, 2024, this is roughly 2 months after Jojo passed, the mother reported that Matthew had difficulty breathing and cyanosis at home. Cyanosis is when your fingers and membranes turn bluish purple because you're not getting enough oxygen, okay? The very next day, they were still admitted to the hospital. Shanna dropped baby Matthew on the floor while feeding him. The following month, Matthew was admitted to the hospital yet again for an asphyxial event after mother reported waking up on top of him when they were co-sleeping in unsafe conditions. Here we have a gap in occurrences, and it makes you wonder if all this was going on, what was going on behind the scenes, and then if nothing was happening, why did it stop? So July 14th, 2025, this is like 9-10 months later, Matthew was admitted again for a near drowning event where Shanna said he slipped and fell in the bathtub, hit his head, and briefly went underwater for 1 to 2 seconds. She also reported a possible hypothermia because the bathwater was cold. The next month, July 2026, the apartment fire broke out that was determined to have been set intentionally in Matthew's bedroom. And then August 25th, the next month again, Matthew admitted for choking and he passes away. Now, when officers found Matthew not breathing again, they began life-saving efforts until EMS arrived. Matthew was then transferred to a Wichita hospital in extremely critical condition on August 25th. The 15-month-old passes away 3 days later, and it's nearly identical to what happened to the older daughter. On January 14th of this year, the final autopsy report determined cause of death were complications of hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy caused by intentionally inflicted asphyxia, and manner of death was ruled as a homicide and not consistent with accidental choking. After a lengthy investigation, Shanna was arrested.
When they came to take her away, Lord answered my prayers.
This family had an extensive history with Kansas DFCF, the medical system, and law enforcement. People who knew Matthew raised concerns as to whether this was incompetent parenting or medical child abuse. I did take a look at Shanna's social media pages only on one platform. There wasn't a lot of information there. There was a lot of marketplace activity where she was selling baby items. She is being held on a $500,000 bond, and her next court hearing should be on May 7th. I want to read some of this media release that was put out by Shanna's attorney. We would remind the public that allegations are not evidence. Ms. Whitton is presumed innocent under the United States Constitution, and the presumption remains in place unless and until the government proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury of her peers. This is the highest burden known to American law and applies to every criminal case, regardless of the seriousness of the accusation or the understandable emotions such as allegations generate. Attempts to define Miss Whitton's character or determine her guilt based on preliminary accusations are both premature and inconsistent with the principles of justice that protect every person accused of a crime. We urge the public to approach this case with patience and restraint, to keep an open mind, and to reserve judgment until all the facts have been fairly and fully presented through the judicial process. This case is nothing like the DeeDee Blanchard case, and I think that just further solidifies that DeeDee Blanchard was not suffering from Munchausen by proxy. But do you guys think that Shanna is suffering from Munchausen by proxy? What other reasonable explanation could there be for all these occurrences of her children suffering from mainly asphyxia? As always, thank you for watching. Please like, follow, reshare, and comment because I really need your guys' thoughts on this one.